Um, I'm Jonas. I'm one of the maintainers on some of the repositories at AsyncAPI, and I am joined in this discussion by a few individuals. And Sergio, maybe you want to start it off, introducing yourself.
Sure. Well, I'm Sergio. I'm an individual contributor as well, working at Postman. I'm a maintainer and owner of a couple of repositories. Not a lot, but enough. And today we are gonna present something Jonas and I have been working on a few months ago. But just for the sake of getting some feedback and see if it makes sense. So,
Alejandra, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Alejandra and I help own the documentation for our community, and I'm excited to be here. I was told I had to say that. So.
thank you.
You get paid to say that.
True.
Cool. I'll just follow up on that. I'm Dave. Work for Postman, again, individual contributor of the AsyncAPI initiative. So excited to be here. I'm again paid to say that, but we'll see what we're talking about. It'll be good.
Yeah. So this roundtable of discussion is it's going to be around something called the Parser API. It's not something that is what's it called? It's not something that has been integrated yet, so it's still in early developments and just in the thought process. So in order to be more concrete in how we're gonna suggest this to the whole community, we wanted to have a discussion about whether it makes sense or not in basics. So our agenda for today is that we want to first introduce what the hell this thing even is. Sorry, my language. And it kind of have two major points that we're going to discuss. We have something called an intent-driven API, and then we are going to split it up into something called the Parser API. Then we're going to talk on some of the resolutions and how we're going to solve those or how we have solved some of the pain points. And then in the end, start the discussion and feedback gathering of this entire solution. Yeah, so okay, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I get first. Some of you may know what it's this about, but we are gonna basically talk about and be talking about the intent-driven APIs and also what the Parser API, which is a completely different thing. So in a really quick explanation, so what intent-driven APIs are? APIs basically based on what the user intention is, right? So as a really quick example, one intention on AsyncAPI will be like, I need all the messages my application receives or my client receives. This is completely different from other approaches, like you usually have, like, for example, the current Parser GS does everything, all the functions are mapped one-on-one with the document, right? Like if you need to get messages, you have to know where the messages are, in which channel, which operation, etc. We will see more about that later. But I just wanted to clarify then what Parser API means. It's just simple API that we build. It's just a document. It's in a repository under AsyncAPI. That means to have a global API that all parser implementation can follow based on that intent-driven API approach, where we can also add some guidelines on development for those parsers. Like we do have now Parser.js, but we also want to have Parser Go, which it's already there in a repository, in a working progress thing, and some other implementations, right? So this will act as a guideline and some kind of enforcement for developers to follow this API. Again, we will see more about that later.
Just a quick note. So if anyone is watching that want to participate in the discussion or want to join live on stream, that is entirely possible, and we really encourage it. Or just ask questions during the live stream and we'll pick it up as we go. But yeah, let's continue.
So some pain points we wanted to solve with the intent-driven API for the parser, right? Me especially, when I joined the initiative, so it was very hard for me working with the parser because I didn't have a strong background on the spec. And this is something it seems happens also for other users, right? So the need of having deep knowledge of the spec for doing basic operative. And with basic operative, again, we could use the same example. It's get all the messages my application receives. If you can move, Jonas. Okay, thank you. So this is a real example, a code example for making that operation right now, that operative, sorry. So in order to get all the messages my application receives, I will have to filter all the channels based on a operation, in that case publish, then get all the messages that operation could have, and then just return, right? As you can see in this picture, so you have to know first what publish, what subscribe means. Also, the fact that each operation could have several messages because we use the keywords any of, for example. So this is a very particular spec feature that if you don't know, you couldn't do that. So as you can see, the knowledge should be like, you have to be very on the spec and knew how the spec it's described for just getting a list of messages. Another example would be that all the breaking changes we introduce on the spec are also propagated into the tooling, in that case, the Parser.js. For example, if we see this example here that I put it, it's based on some of the suggestions we have received later, like for the PubSub, there is an issue that Frank opened for moving operations. One of the things he suggested was to move operations to the root of the document. As you can see here, operations are just objects that links channels and messages based on the operation itself. This is right now not possible to do with the current implementation in the parser. So the previous example that I showed will completely don't work, because as operations were previously inside channels, like literally inside channels, you cannot do that anyway. Again, so you cannot get messages from an operation that it's inside the channel, because as I said, the parser is mapping the spec with functions that extracts data from the document. Yeah, you can pass to the next slide, please. So this is basically what I was explaining. It's not anymore channel publish, and messages, because operations are in the root of the document. So it would be, let's say, operation, publish, messages, right? It will change the API completely. So my application that uses this parser, like templates, will have to be updated for ensuring the new changes are applied. Yeah, you can continue if you want, Jonas, with the next.
All right. So in terms of the pain point for the Parser API, it's more in the global sense. So how do we ensure that there are no inconsistencies between what is implemented in Go versus what is implemented in JavaScript? One of these inconsistencies could, for example, be that we have these hash servers, hash channels, hash messages, functions, support functions in a sense. And other implementations might not have them, because it's at the moment it's up to the individual maintainers to decide what is needed, and also in terms of what is requested from the community. It could also be that one of the parsers implements one of these functions with different meaning from one another. One of these examples could be that hash servers returns false if it's an empty object, for example, or an empty array, where others define it as, well, servers are defined like it returns an empty array that is not considered not to be present. And we even have issues in the current JavaScript parser implementation for this exact reason, because I think it was me that had another interpretation of it, and the implementation was done differently than what I was assuming. One of the other pain points is, in order to implement a parser, sometimes require deep knowledge of the specification itself. One of these examples could, for example, be how do you handle dereferencing? Because one of the key points is that we like to use reusability in a lot of places, for example, using refs to reference external messages. But how should a parser even handle such a case? What specifications does it follow? Is there any edge cases where you have to be more alert than in other places? And for example, this could also be for multiple schema formats. One of the features in the spec is that we can define schemas or payloads as different formats. But how should a parser handle when you have 10 different formats that a payload could be? One of these things is that there's no common documentation explaining how to solve this. So that is one of the other sides of this story, which is just creating consistency. So if you start to focus a little bit more on the solution side of things, Sergio, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, I can do it. So getting all those pain points that we described, so we realized that we had to do something there. Like in one side, the intent-driven API will help us to solve something. Like, yeah. Just move the next slide, please. So we can see here the previous example where we were breaking the implementations on the parser. So if we'd rather follow an intent-driven API, this screenshot we see here, it's a real example on the Parser API, which, as I said, it follows this intent-driven approach. We can see that we have a method called application subscribable messages. I don't know if the pronunciation is right, but so you can see here that the intent is pretty clear, right? So in that case is the application can subscribe to those messages. So those messages are the ones that my application will receive. If I use that, it will be always the same, no matter what the meaning if the meaning changes of what is published or what is subscribed, because we see application prefix there. So you as application always will have your messages there. It doesn't matter if the implementation, if the spec changes, right? So if you move to the next slide, you will see the example. The previous example just ends up being this, calling just one method. Implementations can always change the behavior from version to version. If today publish means one thing and tomorrow means completely the opposite, the only thing that will change is the implementation, but the API calls will remain the same, right? So that's the big benefit on using this intent-driven API. Yeah, you can move. And what Jonas was saying, basically, yeah, I could say, don't worry.
Go.
So yeah, the documentation is the base for guidelines on implementing this, right? So they can act for enforcing developers to follow some kind of rules, like how to do the referencing, bundling, how do we handle several schema formats. Also, what are the minimum things your parsers should comply with? In terms of whatever we decide, it's like the minimum quality or the quality gate we want to have in AsyncAPI tooling, right? And yeah, here we go. So we try to be brief enough. So there are a lot of digests for some of you maybe, but I would really like to start some discussion and gather some feedback from you. So we enable a URL there that it's a hackmd.io thing where we can write some pros, cons, or whatever you think should be there.
Sergio, do you want to share your screen for the discussion? And then I have the edit on.
I think you can open directly as you are gonna edit it.
Okay.
I guess. Yeah, makes sense.
Let's do that then. Let's see if Lucas is awake. Nice.
Okay. So first, I guess, time for questions before getting into this.
Yes.
Want to start?
Well, yeah. What kind of questions do you want to go into without getting into it? I've got some stuff to get into it, but they kind of are questions or thoughts, I guess. So
Is there any clarifications you want to have made? Something that didn't make sense, or something that's still a little bit hazy in terms of what is what?
I don't think so. I think maybe a couple of things, but I think they'll come out as we talk through them. Yeah.
Okay.
I can just start and give you my initial thoughts if you want.
Yeah, sure. We can start with that. Yeah.
I think Dave has a whole PowerPoint of feedback for you guys.
No, I just been writing.
A new application that shows that.
Yeah. So I'm literally come from, you explained something at the start. You said when you had little knowledge of the spec and you were trying to use the parser JS, you had to understand the spec to use the parser. And this is literally my experience I had like a month ago when I was doing the visualization stuff. I was trying to use the Parser JS library, but I was kind of like, okay, how do I use this thing? Like operation dot this dot that, whatever else. I'm literally doing stuff at the moment, writing plugins, using the Parser JS file and still having them problems personally, which is I have to. I'm forced to follow the pattern of the spec. Yeah, I'm forced to follow. I have to know. As you said earlier, I have to know that, and I've definitely felt that. So going from an intent API and seeing what's been some of the things on here. I think they personally, I think most of them. Well, I guess the details will come out later, but I think the whole principle makes sense for me. I don't, from a consumer point of view, right? I don't want to know how, if I want to get all the messages for this file, I don't really want to know, personally anyway, I don't really want to know the implementation of that. Yeah. I just want it. And I think the same goes to a lot of, when you look at, I think anyway, I'm trying to think of sort of top of my head, but I think a lot of mature APIs, a lot of mature SDKs and everything else like that have that kind of pattern, right? As a consumer, it's like the developer experience. As the consumer, you kind of just want to just say, okay, here's some API. If you want to get all, for example, you showed an example earlier. If you want to get all the messages that subscribe, I have to do some, at the moment, I have to use the parser and do this mapping stuff, and then has subscribe, has publish, and then filter them out based on if they're subscribe or publish. Whereas in a new way, it'll be like, just give me all the subscribe messages, or give me all this, give me all that, which is from an API point of view, a lot better. I guess there's still gonna be, I'm looking through the spec now, or the version 1 document, but I guess there's still going to be some coupling, right? That's what you're trying to get rid of, is the tight coupling. But you're always, I guess, we're always going to have some coupling. For example, what happens one day if the word publish was gone, or the word subscribe was gone? Then your API is like, okay, what does that mean anymore? I guess you could do things like non-breaking changes, so deprecate the functions as we go forward. I think that'd be cool. And introduce new functions. But there is still, no matter what we do, I imagine there'll be coupling. But I think from what you've shown and what I understand, there is a lot at the moment was tightly coupled. Yeah, and it's just like it's just releasing that a bit and allowing us to be. It's still coupled, but in a better way, which would be good.
Yeah. Just wanted to say that whenever we start designing the API, just a disclaimer. So the API, it's nothing there. It's just a document, and it's in alpha, draft, whatever you want to call it, right? So it's just to have something to present and to talk about. But whenever we started, we did things based on concepts, like the concept that represents AsyncAPI. So trying to get more away or far from implementations, from details, technical details, and rather being based on what AsyncAPI documents are based on, right? Like in the repository, you will find some of these, like, called models. We call it models. What the channel is, what a message is, but not from the point of view of the technical implementation. That's the point. So right now it seems pretty coupled, but the reality is that it's not that coupled, because this is based on those models, not on the document or how the document is organized. I don't know if I'm explaining myself.
I think so. I think that's the key, really, is you spoke about messages, channels, and operations. If I was to join another call, if I was to talk about AsyncAPI to someone else, we talk in the same language, right? We talk about operations and messages and channels and everything else like that. So I think that makes sense what you're saying. There has to be a language that has to be a base language, doesn't there, for the spec? And the spec base language is that channels, operations, messages. For now, anyway, until like 3.0 might come out and change some stuff or whatever. But the language evolves with us. Yeah, the language evolves. So having them key I don't know what the word is, but having the key models, I guess, in this kind of makes sense.
Alejandra, do you want to say your initial thoughts, if you have any?
Of course I have thoughts. You know me, I always have opinions. Like, that's never my problem, a lack of an opinion. I'll have other problems, but that won't be one of them. Yes. So first of all, I really enjoyed hearing Dave's questions, because honestly, he kind of voiced some of my own questions, and it was great hearing more details as I myself was also becoming more acquainted with the spec. And just like Dave highlighted, and you also, Sergio and Jonas, all highlighted in your deck, it is true that ironically a bit of a blocker is how well you can understand the spec, right? But I think that's always going to be a problem. And so as far as like what I can do to help out is obviously how can I help document things better or add things that are missing in our docs so that I can or we can help from the doc's perspective as much as possible, right? So at least on the doc's perspective, I wrote a note here that it's right, we don't really have any documentation yet in our main site about different schema implementations and the questions about how to set up your file, what are the limitations. We're really missing that. I did check out the docs directory, markdown docs that you folks already have in your GitHub repo, and it's amazing. I mean, I can tell that you have been really doing a good job maintaining it. So I'm kind of thinking that basically, I guess, I don't know that I have feedback for you. It more felt that I have some takeaway points of action items of things that I can add to the docs board. So for example, now that I'm aware of this, I want to create another issue for the AsyncAPI community docs in our GitHub board that we have, which I can share in a link in a second. And then I'll create that issue and tag you folks, and you can tell me more information about what you think is needed from the doc side. That's kind of what came to my mind.
Yeah, just on the docs there, actually. I guess with Intent API, it's kind of like user focused or user driven. So I want published messages, I want subscribe messages, and I think what would be quite interesting in the future with this, if it went forward, is there are going to be common, I don't know, 10 or 20 functions that most people will use, I think, anyway. The most common one being get the messages, get the published messages, whatever. So, you look on other doc websites and stuff, but it'd be really cool to have like a super enriched experience with some of them key functions and key examples. Like we spoke about what an operation is, what a channel is, and what a message is, but really home in on developers, like understand this language that we're speaking, because once you can understand these concepts, you'll be able to easily understand these APIs. So, get me application publishable messages. That's a mouthful. But, returning these messages, okay, what is a message and all that stuff. So I don't know, I can just already envision, it'd be nice just have that, even to the point where you can just run it and get the messages in the documentation code themselves and have a play around with it and things like that. Would be really cool.
Makes sense. Yeah. So to get into a little more in depth in terms of what each introduction of these concepts would actually have of either positive or negative sides. Just to get a little more concrete also in terms of when me and Sergio finalized the suggestion to whether to try and highlight why we should make this change to the community. I think that, Sergio, what do you think how should we start off?
Yeah, I mean, the point when when we think about it and we present this, everything seems like super nice, right? It's like, oh yeah, why we didn't have that already? So something I think we have to have clear whenever we finish this this meeting is like, I would say we have to answer few questions, right? Like, from my point of view, the question that makes me like rethink again and again is like, is it worth to invest time, right, on moving, for example, current Parser JS to a new completely API that it's this one, right? Like the one that Parser API presents, the intent-driven one. If no, is it worth to invest time at some point? Or is it even worth to invest time on an intent API? So how can we answer those questions? It's not something we have to decide now, and we won't do it, but we have to gather all the feedback from all of you. So we see, yeah, go for it, Jonas. You wanted to say something?
No, I actually
No.
didn't, but I can do that.
Okay.
I can do that.
No, it's fine. No, I just wanted to say that the benefit seems to be like clear. There are more benefits that we wrote somewhere in some issues already, and it's fine. But I think we have to find the really like the negative sides or the things we have to take care about. Lucas, for example, right now wrote like, I don't think there can be any negative sides on the intent-driven API as long as we do it right. And I agree. So let's try to find the pain points on doing it, like how I can avoid doing it wrong. I can introduce one thing and let's talk about it if you agree. Something that will cause introducing this change is that we are going to add a new layer, right, of abstraction. So agree, users won't need to completely understand or go deep into the spec, but users will need to understand the intent-driven API as well. So they try to pronounce these application publishable messages, whatever, so whatever we do there, it should be taken in consideration from the user experience or developer experience point of view. Should be easier than learning the whole spec, but I don't think it should be like close to that level of, I don't know how to explain it, but it shouldn't be hard to understand or to learn this new API.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just had a random thought too. So you defined, I don't know, there's 100 functions here, right? Maybe more functions. But where could you start off as an MVP or initial, X version? So as I said, get the top 10, get some feedback, maybe get the top 10, and then just release it, and see. Yeah, and that will be truly kind of intent driven, because hopefully users will make pull requests or suggestions. So, okay, I need to get X by Y somehow, or I need this kind of API that you're not exposing me to, rather than coming up with the whole API up front. Because I guess the risks of coming up with the API up front is, I don't know, it's a whole coupling thing again. It's like, is 80% of what we're about to do going to be in quotes useless? Not useless, but do you see what I mean? No one's going to use that as much as the other stuff. I don't know, but you would definitely get some intent driven stuff there for sure from users of the API.
So my understanding of what you said was that instead of having functions to access all information in the spec or in a document, we start with, for example, only the bare minimum that we currently know we need.
It's
instead of introducing 100 functions, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
It could just be an approach to get something out there, get some feedback, and then get some community involvement, I guess. Adding new functions, adding it over time.
I mean, the current document, for example, is having in mind also the current Parser JS implementation. So it has tons of functions because Parser JS has as well, right? Because it solves some user needs. Maybe it's a problem on documentation. That's right.
It's also just to highlight that we have these, for example, the HTML template. If you want to generate documentation from your AsyncAPI document, that specific template uses all the information available in your document. That means that the minimal viable product for that specific template is all the 100 functions in a sense. Because you have to access each and every value that you have in your document. There needs to be a function to retrieving that.
If you wanted to replace that document generator with this, then you would need to support that for sure.
But it's a good point that the other approach is also an option. So instead of adding a lot of intents and a lot of things that we just think about, we can just let the use cases drive that change.
Something to consider, I think.
Yeah. And as Lucas says, we have some intents functions in the parser at the moment. For example, we have these, do we have any servers, for example? Is there any servers defined? That's a good point. Or all schemas, yes, and all messages. We also have that one. All right, so let's try a round where we just add all of the positive things we can think about introducing an intent-driven API. And then we just go for each one, and then we start discussing, I think.
Isn't it ironically adding a layer of abstraction also a positive?
Yes, I would say so. What about you folks?
Yeah, indeed.
Not in then. Dave?
I think at this layer, right, it's just one abstraction. There are times where abstraction is not good, but this is just without this we would have like what we have. We have a direct integration with the spec. So I think the abstraction makes sense. I can just kind of foresee the developer experience hopefully being a bit better, which is I don't have to be an expert. Yeah, I want to use the spec, but I don't want to be an expert. I don't want to spend hours learning the spec. Or for example, maybe my co-worker's thrown me over a spec and I want to write some tooling or something, and I just there'll be level. I think there'll be levels of. Yeah, I think there's just areas we can improve, and I think this abstraction would be good.
I basically think that a good developer experience is letting the developer use the tool the way the developer wants to use it. So if you don't want that abstraction layer because you really love to deep dive and feel very comfortable with the spec, you should not be blocked from doing that. But if you're not that developer and you don't really want to suffer and feel very comfortable with the spec, you should be able to be empowered via that layer of abstraction so as to still be able to build things. And that's why I think that it's both, that's why I think it's also a positive. And I think that striking a balance is always hard, of course, but that's just like the developer life, I think.
Yeah, true.
So, yeah, just wanted to say,
Sorry,
Alejandra. So you mean that the implementation should also respect that users can do whatever they want, right? Like if they want to go in hard mode, let's say, or God mode, let's move on that, right? Like you can access the the raw object or the raw data whenever you want. You don't have to go through the intents, right?
Yes, that's right. If I were to be a responsible person, then you're correct. I agree. I would, the documents would have both versions. Like, how do you want to build this? Do you want to just use the layer of abstraction? Then you can do this, or option B, you can do this. So absolutely, the user should know by going to the documents that they have these two amazing options to pick from, and that they get to pick the one that works best for them.
So I see it as a positive side, right? Like you can still access the underlying raw data, right? So even, yeah, okay. Dave?
I guess it depends on how you access it, I guess. So some libraries out there, the ones that I think get a lot of traction, get a lot of use, is when it's key to the developer experience, just as you were saying. So you start off at the layer at the top, this what we're talking about here, the intent API, right? And most people probably are happy, like, yay, I can do what I want. But you do have the use cases where you need to go deeper, and some, so I'm trying to think of some examples, like React might be one, for example. Some libraries are really good where you do have APIs to dive in deeper, and they have documented APIs to dive in deeper. This is like your 20% of developers, right, that want to write plugins, want to write this, want to do this. But the downside to that, I guess, is we've got to maintain both. If we were to do it like that, you'd have to maintain this deeper API that you don't really know what the use base is there, and the other one. So I guess just maintenance. If we decided to have,
I think you also want to do the extra. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Dave. But
cool.
basically, I think his point is really important, and we should not forget it. And so the maintenance pain, how do we know it's worth it? So we also need to do a community survey to confirm from the community, do you need both options? Because yes, otherwise I agree with Dave. Everyone's going to be just like basically crying all the time. Well, I don't think that's what he said, but maybe deep down in his heart, that's what he was thinking.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I think the key is just to start at the top layer. Let's just scratch it off. I would anyway, and then otherwise, if we start by releasing both, here's the final product. Here's our, these APIs that we think are really good. I think it's the 80-20% rule, as I mentioned earlier. I think you will probably find that people might not want a deep dive, right? And what's the point? What's the point in writing that code? What's the point in maintaining it when no one would comment on our discussion, let's say, that we would raise or whatever. So I think, the feedback's key.
Go, Alana.
Sorry. I really need to do better with this. And then to play devil's advocate on Dave's point, because like Dave keeps bringing up really interesting points, and that's why I keep replying to them. To play devil's advocate, if I remember what we were talking about, I think that how do we know specifically 20% is the actual number of developers who like to deep dive? I don't know that we actually know that for sure. So we need to actually do the survey or research to confirm what percentage of developers is going to say, yes, we really need the ability to not be limited by an abstraction layer. We want to deep dive and do this stuff ourselves. That's what I'm wondering, honestly.
I'm just going to add this point up here just to remember it, that we need more data, or at least a way to get data on the usage, what is being used, how is it being used, etc. I think we already have some of the issues, at least in the JavaScript parser. So it is something that's laying in the back mind. But it's a good point.
And the other thing that I'm thinking is just to remember that even though we're talking about the developer experience, it doesn't mean that our users will only be specifically coders or developers, right? There could be a product manager. There could be a marketing person who is getting up to speed on the tool so that they could do marketing about why they're using AsyncAPI for a thing. So just remembering that the layer of abstraction also benefits people that still need to understand technical products or technology without being themselves the developer. So we are really opening the tool to be understood by all kinds of people, which I think is very important, right? To make it accessible to anyone, whether or not you're, a coder that feels comfortable really coding and programming and stuff.
I guess this is the core point, right? Helps everyone not just code out, better understand the tool. I guess that was the core point you made, right, Alejandra?
Yes, you did a better summary of my rant.
All right. Any thoughts, Dave, Sega?
Yeah, no, I didn't think about that, but it totally makes sense. As again, I kind of just vision other projects, like they get a lot of traction, but like they have like Superbase, for example, has a landing page. The first things you see are like APIs, right? But the APIs aren't like crazy. It's just like a 2-liner, and it would be like async API. Get describe your messages using a spec file, and then also there's a 2-liner of code. This is how easy it is, and I think for product owners and non-developers, it's kind of getting that message across, right? This is how easy it is. Once you let people do the spec and invest in the spec, this is how easy it is to get value from the spec with 2 lines of code, 1 line of code, or whatever. So I didn't think of that at all. So it's a good shout.
Oh yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about myself right now. And I think that's exciting because then if anyone can have a better understanding of the tool by things like this, then it'll be easier to spread the word of this open source community. Because then if this is easier to learn, to understand, then more people will join and want to check it out. And that's how you get that person that's not in developer job. Sorry, word in English, I'm forgetting. That's how you get someone in your company or organization or community who is not specific a developer to maybe they land on this and they go, this is really cool. This sounds similar to what I heard my developing team talking about. I bet this is useful to us. And so then they can grab this and say, hey, have you guys heard about AsyncAPI? And then, we are assuming that only developers will be the first to land on our website or to hear about this. But that's not always the case, right? There's a lot of lateral stakeholders, and lateral teams and communities, people that'll be Googling just like us and find out things and say, I should share this with my developer team or my developer community. So we're also like shooting ourselves in the foot if we don't, remember that. Always the easier it is to learn a new technology, the more we're helping us and everyone around us.
I guess I can add this to the negative sides of keeping the current API style, right? Like if we keep the one-on-one coupling that we have at the moment, I guess all the positive sides of the intent-driven is basically all the negative sides of the current API style, right? I guess I can assume that.
I think so. Something I wanted to add very quickly. So what Alejandra said, to get more info from the current users, which I agree. Before starting to think about this intent-driven, blah, 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 we spent some time analyzing our current code, like in all the repositories we have that are using the parser currently, like all the templates, the generator, and some other. And all those intents are based on that, which is something.
Yes.
So this is important to know that they are based on really useful or real use cases or real intents. Anyway, I agree. We have to grab more information from others because this is only what we have under AsyncAPI umbrella, but who knows who is using as well the parser.
Yeah.
In fact, this is what we want, right? So to increase the usage of the parser and people to start using and creating their tools very quickly. If we care about user experience in website, why we don't care about libraries? Like we want to increase the usage.
That's a good point. And I actually forgot everything about that we did that. So all the intents, and Dave, goes hand in hand with your minimal viable product, right? Is that all of the intents that are currently present is based on templates and other usages of the parser that we currently have. So it's not something that just me and Sergio ping-ponged and said, yeah, this is what we should add, without actually having a use case underlying supporting it. So yeah, good point. I want to ask the question, is it a good or a bad thing to decouple the parser against the specification? Because in terms of this breaking changes, for example, how far can we stray the parser API or the intent-driven API from the current spec? Because the further away we are from each other, the more abstract will it also be for users, in a sense. Hope that makes sense.
It's another layer to learn, right? It's another language. It's another thing to learn. It's another. I think this is the key. I don't know. For me, it's the key with the API definitions. It's like, if I've got, can't remember what I was going to say now, but but I think you're right. I think it's something to be considered for sure, because the last thing you want to do is write an abstraction on top, and then people got to learn the abstraction on top, and they're like, okay, the AsyncAPI spec talks about operations, but this thing might somehow interpret that somewhere differently. How opinionated can it be? And the opinions might hurt you, right? Or they might guide you. But yeah,
That's true.
that's difficult to answer, really.
Go, Sergio.
No, I just wanted to say that there are like 8 minutes left, and I would really like to have you here for the rest of the day, but I think I can't, apparently. So I would really like to take this moment for quickly go over the Parser API. So not only the intent-driven API, so what the Parser API repository means, right? So remember, is where we will put this intent-driven, and we would kind of force the user to implement it, right? So any thoughts about it?
To implement it.
Yes, for parser developers to, whatever.
Yeah.
You got it.
I think this is a note I wrote down when you were going through it earlier. I think, I don't know if you thought about this, or if this is a crazy thing to do or what, but if you can enforce, if you have the API and it's well documented and you can enforce that stuff like you have, let's say version 1, and Go parser, JavaScript parser, PHP parser, or whatever, you could, in theory, I don't know if you've thought about this, or as I said, but you could, in theory, I guess, test parsers against the spec, right? So you could say, okay, PHP parser, someone comes along and writes one, and it's like, you could run these spec files, or this spec or this test, to make sure that all functions were implemented, that it returned, given this file, that when I call to get this operation, it returns kind of what I expect. What is an operation? What is an operation model? Okay, it has a name, has an ID, has an operation ID, there are things, I don't know how far you take it, but there might be ways, I guess, you can enforce it, if that's, but that's also a negative, I think, is what we're saying here is, here's a parser API, here's the guidelines, and well, they're not are they guidelines? That's a question, right? Because we might be saying, no, these are enforced. If you want to write an AsyncAPI parser, an official one, then these are enforced. And that brings benefits because we're kind of like, okay, if we're enforcing that, that means we can standardize that. That means we can talk about the same language, the domain language and operation, and all this kind of stuff. When we make breaking changes, we can easily go and do that across. If they're guidelines and it's YOLO land, then it's like, well, good luck to you, right? Good luck to your Go parser because
YOLO land.
yeah.
Oh my God.
So, yeah, some interesting. I think some benefits and cons there. I think to consider.
Keep them coming. The more the merrier. Alana, anything you want to add?
Other than joining the YOLO train to YOLO land with Dave, nope, I'll let you guys finish strong.
I want to quickly say something very, very quick about the Parser API. As you may remember, one of the goals on AsyncAPI roadmap was to decrease the time from user to implement something based on the spec. Since we are going to unify experience for users that are using the parsers, this aligns totally as well with this goal, basically. So having known one API, you can reduce the time on implementing whatever tool on top of the parser. One, because it's based on an intent-driven API. We already saw that. And both, because if you know how the GS parser works, you can implement it in Go, Rust, Java, Delphi, COBOL, or whatever you want. Or you can quickly implement it, right? So just wanted to say this for the record. And YOLO as well.
Yeah, it's a good shout. I think it, ultimately, I guess from my point of view, I think it would be nice if you had official parsers that they followed the same API and they followed the same language. I think for me, the key is the language. And like if I'm asking for a message or an operation, I get an operation. Okay, what's an operation? Let's define that. Because if that's the same in PHP and Node and Go and everything else, then I think it's like REST, right? It's like, what's a post request? Okay, we all kind of get that. What's there's a lot of terminology in REST and APIs that we understand. But I think there's a lot of newish terminology here that coming to AsyncAPI new, you take some time to get your head around. Even with the issue we've got open now, the whole publish subscribe confusion, right? And servers and everything else. So once you get the basics right, coding it and tooling and everything else becomes a lot easier. And if the parsers themselves are standardized, that becomes even better, right? Because the last thing I guess you'd want to do, I don't know. My point of view is I'm in Node, right? I'm a developer. I'm writing some stuff. I'm doing some stuff. And then there's another team over there that are doing some Go stuff. And they're using and then we're all using AsyncAPI. And now we go away and we talk about why have you done it like that? Why is your operation like that? Oh, because that's what an operation is. And it's like, no. The Node library is given me like this. Oh no, the Go library is opinionated, and let's just do it like this. So I think there's some huge wins here.
Anyone want to have the final thoughts, final say? I think we have to round it up.
4 tickets to YOLO land.
Yeah, I would say that at the end, what I would really like to is to. So nowadays, all of us use IDs for coding, and that's a fact. So I would just want to get a line, write a line, like write OP word, and to get a suggestion about like, give me all the operations of this application or something like this. And the only way to achieve that is that, yeah, from my point of view, of course, is to have those things like the intent-driven API in place plus the unified parser API. And that's all. And I'm gonna shut up my mouth.
So yeah, thank you everyone for participating. We are out of time, unfortunately, so we are unable to talk or to continue the discussion. But if you have any extra comments, positive sides, negative sides for the introduction of these, please do let us know. I think you all have access to the document as well, and otherwise just ping us on Slack. And yeah, thank you Alejandro and Dave for joining us, and see you around.
Cool. Cheers.
See ya, folks. Thank you.
See you around.
Let's see if Lucas